Hey guys, it's Keri from Keri at Home Furniture. I am working on a mid-century modern bedroom set, and it consists of a long dresser and this nightstand. And I had this great plan. I had some, ideas of what I was going to do to the drawer fronts, and I was going to paint the piece a different color. And as I started working on it, I ran into obstacle after obstacle and completely changed my plan. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about what happens when you run into some obstacles, some ways I figured out how to get around some of those things, and then also just share with you some of the Shabby paint products that I'm going to use in this project today. So the first thing I wanted to do was talk about as you see, this nightstand is painted like a custom navy blue. I don't know if you saw my last video where I talked about how to make a memo board out of a frame and some chicken wire. And if you haven't, check it out. It turned out really cool. But I like to custom mix different colors. And this was probably about 2/3 of Shabby Paint's marine blue and then 1/3 of Shabby Paint's licorice. And it comes to this beautiful navy blue. Now, initially, if you look here, I'm going to show you the before photos of the long dresser. Here's the long dresser. And you can see it was a bright blue with some, individual knobs. And then here is the before picture of this nightstand. I didn't get them together. I found the nightstand later at a thrift store, and I was really excited because it matched the piece perfectly. So somebody probably thought I was insane for buying that piece because, as you can see, the paint job was horrendous. So that's the before of these pieces. So my initial plan was to do something kind of similar to that bright blue. I wanted to use marine blue, which is a little bit deeper shade than what it was. And I had planned on sanding the drawer fronts and using Shabby Paint's hazelnut rebacks to stain it. And so I've spoken before about clear wax, which is a top coat. And what you may not know is that Shabby also has they have tinted top coats, which they're fabulous. If I'm not forgetting, I think there's white, there's driftwood, there's black, and there's hazelnut, which is a brown color. And you can mix them together and make different shades if you want. I love how the hazelnut looks alone, and I love, love, love the way it looks with just a little bit of black in it, because, that's my mad scientist coming out. So, but that was the plan. I was gonna put hazelnut rebacks on the drawer fronts and have this brighter blue, okay? So I went ahead and I did that, the brighter blue on the body of the dresser and the nightstand. And I wasn't sure I was loving it. You look at a piece, and this is mid-century, and it's all about like modern and classic and kind of sleek lines. And I just felt like, even though the color marine blue is beautiful, it didn't really speak to the piece. I thought, and it also kind of, because I'm going to be selling this, it kind of made it more of, a boy's dresser. Whereas this set, honestly, it's beautiful. It can go into, like, now that it's being updated, it could be used in, an adult's, room, or a boy or a girl, depending on what accents you put with it. So I just didn't want to do that to myself. So I went ahead and I painted the whole thing this custom navy blue. Well, then I went to sand the drawer fronts, and I did. Boy, did I. So what I want to show you here, what happened. What I didn't realize when I sanded it, I used a palm sander, and I kind of went to town on it. And I didn't realize that the drawer fronts were a very, very thin veneer over like an MDF. So I went through the veneer in all of these areas, as you can see here. And I did that on the long dresser too. So great, what do I do now? So I knew that staining it outright wasn't going to be an option, and I'm going to show you why. Okay, if I was going to just stain this drawer front, if I hadn't gone through the veneer and I had, sanded it down the right way, I would be able to just use my hazelnut Rebacks, which I think that's the black. So this is hazelnut Rebacks. I'll go ahead and shake it to mix it up. All right, and then I use a paper plate. You don't need very much at all. This is probably even too much, okay? And I am using a blue Shabby sponge, which is phenomenal for applying all of your top coats, including Rebacks. I usually have just like a little bowl of water that then I squeeze out. You know, you don't want it to be dripping. And then I apply the Rebacks onto my sponge like that, okay? And then you take the drawer front or whatever you're staining, and you just apply the Rebacks with your sponge. All right. I don't know if you can see that. All right. Right, I'm going to add a little bit more and finish the other side. Then I'm going to hold it up and show you what I mean. Now this is sanded down raw wood, so you know, if you're using hazelnut Rebacks or any of the Rebackses, you wouldn't necessarily have to use this much, but it's really it's soaking into the wood. And the beautiful thing about Rebacks is that not only can it be used as a stain or a glaze, but it's a top coat. So if I actually would have not sanded through the veneer, all I would have to do would be 2 coats of this and my top coat would be done. So as you can see, this is beautiful, okay? This came out great. Bring this over and show this to you so you can see the color. All right, but what you see here, see where I went through right here? That's why I'm not going to be able to use this as a stain, because even if I do a couple layers, I'd have to go pretty dark in order to be able to cover that up, and you might still see that spot. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry just a second, and then I'm going to come back and tell you about what I did to fix it. Okay, so I let this dry for a little while. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of create like a faux wood out of paint and the Rebacks colors, okay? So now I've done this before. I do it all the time whenever I paint like a laminate desktop, or if, you know, something comes up and there's an issue with the wood and you have to, you know, fill something, and, you know, a lot of those, you know, the wood fillers, it says paint, it says stainable, but you can usually always see them unless, you know, somebody discovered something that I don't know about. But so this is a process that I've used over and over again. I have people all the time say, you have to teach me how to do this. So I just wanted to go through real quick and show you how to go ahead and do this finish. So I have Shabby Paints color Americano, which is like kind of a rustic gray brown. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of brown to it, because if you use it on its own, you know how gray has like different hues. Depending on the light, I sometimes like it a little bit more of a warm neutral instead of cool. So, but for my purposes today, I have Americano here, all right? And then I also have a color that you have to have, which is Buffalo Brown. Now the Buffalo Brown is this color here. It's a chocolate brown. When it goes on, when it dries a little bit lighter. It's almost like a pale brown. And so it's one of the best colors to use on like layering finishes like this, because it gives so much dimension in it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a thin coat of the buffalo brown, okay, onto this drawer front. Now, the one thing I will say when you're doing this finish, you know, we have a tendency as painters to kind of be like haphazard, and you go through and maybe you like to go against the grain. If you're doing this finish, you want to definitely make sure that you are consistent and go with the grain, because you will see where you didn't at the edges. So you want to make sure that you do that. This clearly doesn't take very long to do. It's just a thin coat, okay? And then I always like to just kind of go back and lay over my paint, get in this crevice here. And if it doesn't look even, that's okay, because I kind of like the way, I kind of like how you can kind of see the grain coming through a little bit. I don't know if you can see that very well, but that's how that's looking. So I do this one finish, this one coat, and now we're gonna let this dry. Doing the top, lip, just a light coat, and come through, do the sides. I'm using my Klingon Shorty, which I love this brush. This is a great brush. Gets into tight spaces. All right, so we'll be back in just a couple minutes after this dries. All right, so now I have the Americano, and I'm gonna repeat the same process. I'm just gonna do a thin coat of the Americano right over the top of the buffalo brown, okay? I don't know if you can see that. Now the reason I'm going right over this is that I am gonna come through and just do like a real subtle wet distress to bring all kinds of layers and dimension to the drawer front or the, you know, desktop, whatever you're working on. So you're gonna cover up that buffalo brown, okay? And same thing, I didn't do the bottom before. I'll go ahead and do the bottom. Come through and perfect this a little bit better after I'm done. But see how I'm doing the sides right now, and it's leaving like a little vertical edge along the side? That is what I'm talking about, that you want to make sure that you go back over and kind of brush it back on the front to make sure that it's all with the grain. Because if I were to leave that right now, you're going to see that line. And we don't want to see that line. So I'm going to just lay it back, okay? And then now we'll wait for this to dry, and I'm going to come through and do one more very thin coat of the buffalo. And then after that, then I'll go ahead and do a wet distress. Okay, so the coat of Americano is dry. All right, so then I'm going to do the last step and just come through and do another quick coat of the buffalo. You can see already it looks kind of cool, because you can see there's like gradations of the color, and since it's thin coats, you know, you're not doing anything with like super full coverage. So bring this up so you can see it. Okay, so looks a little like bit like full coverage. You can definitely see that. Well, you can not see the worn out veneer over on the corners anymore. And so yeah, so this looks good. So now you could either leave this as is and move right to the next step of using the Revax to kind of give even more dimension at the top and do a sealant. Or what I'm going to show you is how I like to use just a quick wet distress to just kind of bring out the Americano, and it just gives a little bit more dimension, and that added with the Revax looks phenomenal. So let's let this dry and then we'll go ahead to the next step. Okay, so now we're going to start the wet distressing, and when I typically wet distress a piece, I like to use a sanding block, and then I actually saturate it and get it wet on the inside. So then I usually use like a 300 grit, very fine grit, because you don't want anything too abrasive, because as you're wet sanding, you won't even be able to really see how much you're taking off until you wipe it back with a damp rag after you're done. So you want to be super careful that you don't overdo it, and you could go through too many layers. So I'm going to be very, very gentle. I do have a spray bottle that I use to just dampen the surface. There we go. So I'm going to pull this forward so you can see what I'm doing. Just spraying it lightly, just to dampen the surface. And then I'm going to let you see from the side kind of what I'm doing here. So I'm going to stay away from the outer edges where the veneer, where we had the issues with the veneer. And I'm just going to very lightly, with a very light hand, run the sanding block over the center. And as you see, when you do this, the water creates kind of a slurry. The water and the paint mixed together. And then that's all I'm going to do for now, because in fact I can already see some of the wood kind of coming through in the center. But then I would just take a damp microfiber cloth and just kind of wipe this back. Okay? All right. Okay, now normally this doesn't take this much off. This took a lot of it off. I think it was probably because I didn't wait very long in between the coats to dry. Certainly I've done this a ton of times before and it doesn't take that much of it off. But I do like that it brings in some of the color. You can see some of the natural tones. You see the natural wood, you see the Americano, and you see the brown. So hopefully once this dries and we go ahead and we add the Revax on, we could, it'll kind of make it all blend, and then what you're gonna get some dimension out of that, okay? So let's just wait till this dries and then we'll just move on to the Revax step. So our drawer front is dry now, and now we're gonna move on to the Revax portion. I have Shabby Paints Revax in hazelnut and the black Revax. So what I usually like to do, sometimes I'll mix the two together and I'll get a kind of a mid-range color. It's a little bit darker than the regular hazelnut Revax. But for what I'm going to do today, I'm just going to add about this much of the hazelnut in on the plate. And then I'm going to take the black Revax. I want to show you what I'm doing. And I just take it and I like to just kind of pour lines over the top so that it's not mixed together. Can you see that? It almost looks like chocolate. Maybe I'm just hungry. Okay. Same applicator sponge. I'm gonna go ahead and squeeze it out. And then instead of really rubbing it around, I'm just kind of plopping the sponge on here. And what that's doing, I think I have too much water here. Squeeze that out a little bit. Okay, so what that's doing, you can kind of see on the sponge here, where there's parts of the hazelnut and then there's parts of the black. And when I go ahead and apply that, it's not going to be like a super deep consistent color. It's going to give some dimension here. So I'm going to come back around this side so you can see. Okay. And then I'm just going to start, and I'm not going to go over it too much. I'm just going to kind of start at the bottom Now this is where I like to kind of go back and add some more rebacks when I'm doing a color like this, just so that nothing is consistent. I want to make sure that I have, you see as I'm pulling this through, how it's getting, here's some black. You can soften that up a little bit. If it's too much, kind of go through here. And see it's covering up that wood that was showing through before. Kind of almost like stippling. All right, and I'm kind of adding on the top. You hear dogs barking in the neighborhood. All right, I'm gonna finish up the sides. Just gonna kind of go through and move it down, and then I'm gonna hold this up so you can see. Oh, I just made a blob. Okay, this is super forgiving, so I'm gonna go like that. Okay. I'm gonna show you how great that looks. Okay, can you see that? It's kind of hard to tell in the light, but that looks fabulous. You can kind of see some of the lighter Americano from before. You see some of the wood kind of poking through, but it's not wood toned. It's more of a brown tone, but it just, you can tell. And it definitely has a lot of dimension in this right here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna wait for this to dry, and I'm gonna come and do a second coat of this to kind of richen and deepen it up. And you'll see when it dries, you'll be able to see the dimension a little bit better. So the next time you see this, it will be with the second coat on. So, and you'll see exactly how it looks when it's finished. The front of the drawer front is now dry, and I went ahead and put it back together with the navy blue nightstand to see how I liked it. And it looks okay. I mean, I think the process that I showed you is fine. I think that I over sanded. I didn't wait enough time for the paint to cure before I wet sanded, so it looks a little splotchy right now. And if I was going to keep it this way, I would wait 24 hours because with Shabby top coats, you want to just put 2 coats on in 24 hours. So I would wait 24 hours and put another coat on and kind of deepen the drawer front if I was going to leave it the way it is. But I went through all of this on the dresser, and I know that I don't want to leave it like this. In fact, when I went ahead and did these same steps and I put it all together, even though the drawer fronts came out beautiful and I was really happy with the way they individually looked, I didn't like the way they looked together with the navy for this particular style of furniture. So I'm gonna paint it navy. So when I said, you start out with some good plans and you think they're great, and then your project kind of takes on a life of its own. But know that the best part about Shabby Paints is that with these obstacles, it's all of the products work well together. So I don't have to sand this. I don't have to strip this off. I don't have to worry. I can just use my navy paint and paint right over the front of this, which is what I'm going to do next. And you can't do that with wax, because this is a top coat. And, you know, if I was using wax, I'd have to strip that off. Otherwise, the paint wouldn't adhere. So another reason that I love Shabby Paint and the products so much. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this navy, and then I'm going to stage everything. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how my project that started out one way, how it turned out. And I love the way the dresser looks, and I can't wait for you to see how this nightstand looked, and the before and after is pretty amazing. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.